For decades, Americans were sold a promise. Work 30 years, pay into the system, retire with security. That promise is now $4 trillion short, and the people who made it are hoping you never find out. Across America, public pension systems are quietly imploding. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, and state employees approaching retirement are discovering their guaranteed income may not exist when they need it most. The money was supposed to be there. It was collected. It was promised. But somewhere between the paycheck deductions and the retirement checks, trillions of dollars vanished into mismanagement, political theft, and Wall Street gambling. This is not a future crisis. It is happening right now. In Illinois, in Kentucky, in New Jersey, in California. States you live in. States your parents retired to. States where pension checks are already being cut, benefits slashed, and retirement ages pushed back without warning. The math is brutal. The politics are worse. And by the time most Americans understand what happened, their retirements will already be gone. The warning signs have been visible for over a decade, but politicians treated pension accounting like a shell game, hiding liabilities behind optimistic projections while spending contributions on everything except retirement security. In 2024, the total unfunded pension liability across all 50 states exceeded $4.4 trillion. That figure represents money owed to current and future retirees that simply does not exist. It is not sitting in an account. It was never invested. It was promised on paper and spent in practice. To understand the scale, consider what $4 trillion means. It equals roughly $15,000 owed for every single American adult. It exceeds the entire annual federal budget for Social Security. It represents more debt than the combined market value of Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. And unlike corporate debt, pension obligations cannot be restructured, discharged, or renegotiated in bankruptcy. They are constitutional guarantees in most states. The money must be paid. The question is where it comes from. The deterioration accelerated after 2008. When markets crashed, pension funds lost hundreds of billions in value overnight. But instead of adjusting contribution rates or reducing benefit promises, politicians chose denial. They assumed markets would recover fast enough to paper over the gaps. They skipped required contributions to balance budgets. They used accounting tricks to make liabilities appear smaller than they were. By 2015, the hole had grown to $2.8 trillion. By 2020, it crossed $3.5 trillion. And in 2024, actuaries confirmed the damage had reached $4.4 trillion, growing faster than any realistic investment return could repair. The states hiding the worst numbers are not obscure backwaters. They are economic powerhouses with millions of residents depending on systems mathematically destined to fail. Illinois leads the collapse. Its 5 public pension systems carry combined unfunded liabilities exceeding $140 billion. The state's funded ratio sits below 40%, meaning for every dollar owed to retirees, less than 40 cents exists to pay it. To close that gap through contributions alone, Illinois would need to dedicate nearly 25% of its entire annual budget exclusively to pensions. For decades, without interruption, while still funding schools, roads, police, and hospitals. That is not a plan. That is a fantasy. Kentucky ranks nearly as catastrophic. Its teachers' retirement system operates at barely 50% funding, with unfunded liabilities exceeding $43 billion. State employees approaching retirement are discovering that benefit formulas promised decades ago may be legally reduced through what officials euphemistically call pension reform. Reform meaning cuts, cuts meaning poverty. For retirees who structured entire careers around guaranteed income, New Jersey has manipulated pension accounting for so long that its true liability remains disputed. Conservative estimates place unfunded obligations near $100 billion. The state skipped required contributions for years, diverting funds to cover operating deficits. When courts forced compliance, politicians borrowed money to make pension payments, effectively paying interest on money that should have been saved decades earlier. New Jersey now spends more servicing pension debt than it invests in higher education. California presents a different problem. Its systems are not the worst funded percentage-wise, but the sheer scale creates existential risk. CalPERS, the largest public pension fund in America, manages over $450 billion in assets. It sounds enormous until you calculate obligations. CalPERS owes over $1 trillion in future benefits. That gap of $550 billion grows every year. Investment returns fall below the assumed 7% target. In 2022, CalPERS lost $23 billion, 1 year. Nearly 5% of total assets evaporated. Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts follow similar trajectories. Each carries unfunded liabilities exceeding $50 billion. Each has deferred contributions for decades. Each now faces the impossible arithmetic of paying current retirees while funding future obligations, while maintaining public services, while avoiding tax increases that drive residents and businesses to other states. What state do you live in? Drop it in the comments, because the odds are high that your state pension system is hiding numbers that would terrify you. The collapse extends far beyond government employees. The ripple effects threaten every American's financial security, whether they have a pension or not. When pension systems fail, states face three options: raise taxes, cut services, or reduce benefits. None of these choices occur in isolation. Each triggers secondary collapses that spread damage across entire economies. Tax increases are often the first response. Illinois raised its income tax rate 43% between 2011 and 2017, specifically to address pension shortfalls. Property taxes in pension-heavy counties now exceed 4% of home value annually. For a $300,000 home, that equals $12,000 per year, extracted before any mortgage payment. Residents respond predictably. They leave. Illinois lost over 120,000 residents in 2023 alone. The exodus accelerates every year, shrinking the tax base that must fund growing pension obligations. Fewer residents means fewer taxpayers, means higher rates on those who remain, means more departures. The death spiral compounds until municipalities simply cannot collect enough revenue to function. Service cuts follow revenue declines. Cities facing pension emergencies reduce police forces, delay road repairs, close libraries, shorten school years, and defer maintenance on critical infrastructure. The degradation is subtle at first. Potholes multiply, response times lengthen, class sizes grow. Then suddenly, catastrophically, bridges fail, water systems contaminate, and emergency services collapse entirely. Stockton, California declared bankruptcy in 2012 with over $900 million in pension obligations it could not pay. Detroit followed in 2013, cutting retiree pensions by 4.5% and eliminating health care benefits entirely. Central Falls, Rhode Island slashed pensions by 55% after bankruptcy. These were not abstractions. They were real retirees watching guaranteed income disappear overnight. If this helps you understand what's really happening in the economy, hit subscribe. It is free, and it means you will never miss these breakdowns. For private sector workers, the threat operates differently, but just as destructively. When state pension systems demand higher contributions, governments reduce contracts with private businesses. Construction firms lose public projects. Healthcare providers see Medicaid reimbursements cut. Vendors serving state agencies face delayed payments or canceled orders. The pension crisis does not stay contained within public employment. It bleeds into every business that depends on government spending. Housing markets suffer concentrated damage. Pension-troubled states consistently show weaker home price appreciation and higher foreclosure rates. Buyers avoid areas with high property taxes and declining services. Sellers find their largest asset, their home, losing value because the pension crisis made their neighborhood undesirable. Retirement security for everyone erodes. When states cannot meet pension obligations, they pressure federal programs. Social Security reform discussions inevitably include benefit cuts, partly because state pension failures shift more retirement burden onto federal systems never designed to carry it. The $4 trillion hole at the state level makes Social Security's 75-year shortfall even harder to address. The question is not whether this affects you. The question is how severely. Ever notice how these states keep struggling but never fix the real problem? There is a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with economics. The architecture of pension failure is not accidental. It was designed by politicians who prioritize short-term popularity over long-term solvency. Every underfunded system represents decades of deliberate choices to promise benefits without saving to pay them. The mechanism is simple. Public employee unions negotiate contracts. Those contracts include pension benefits calculated on final salary, years of service, and retirement age. A teacher retiring after 30 years might receive 60% of their final salary for life, adjusted for inflation, with healthcare benefits included. The promise sounds reasonable. The math is catastrophic. When contracts are signed, politicians approve benefits that will not come due for decades. The costs are invisible during their terms in office. The benefits are immediate. Unions support politicians who approve generous packages. Politicians get re-elected. Everyone wins except taxpayers who eventually must fund promises made before they could vote. Actuaries calculate required contributions to fund future benefits. Politicians ignore those calculations. Instead of contributing $20 billion annually, they contribute $12 billion and call the remaining $8 billion a budget savings. Accountants flag the gap. Politicians override them. The unfunded liability grows another $8 billion. Repeat for 30 years. By 2024, accumulated skipped contributions across all states exceeded $2 trillion. That figure represents money that should have been saved, should have been invested, should have compounded over decades. Instead, it was spent on projects that generated immediate political credit while creating permanent financial obligations. The investment assumptions compound the dishonesty. Pension funds typically assume 7 to 7.5% annual returns. That assumption determines how much states must contribute. Higher assumed returns mean lower required contributions. Politicians pressure pension boards to maintain optimistic assumptions precisely because realistic assumptions would require higher contributions they refuse to make. When actual returns fall below assumptions, the gap widens. In 2022, public pension funds averaged negative returns, while their actuarial assumptions remained locked at 7%. That single year added over $300 billion to unfunded liabilities nationwide. But annual reports still showed pensions as adequately funded because the accounting used projected returns rather than actual performance. The revolving door between politics and pension management ensures accountability never arrives. Board members overseeing hundreds of billions in assets frequently lack financial expertise. They are appointed as political rewards, not fiduciary competence. Investment decisions reflect relationships with Wall Street firms that donate to campaigns rather than optimal returns for beneficiaries. Fees extracted by investment managers exceed $50 billion annually across public pension systems. Those fees reduce returns available to fund benefits. But fee structures are buried in complex contracts that board members rarely read and never challenge. The money flows from teacher retirement accounts to hedge fund managers, who underperform simple index funds while charging 50 times the cost. When losses mount and funding gaps widen, the same politicians who created the crisis propose solutions. Reform legislation that cuts benefits for new employees while preserving full benefits for current retirees. Transition costs that require decades of higher contributions before savings materialize. Pension obligation bonds that borrow money at 5% to invest at assumed returns of 7%. Gambling that markets will outperform interest costs. None of these reforms address the fundamental problem. Politicians still refuse to contribute what actuaries require. They still approve benefit increases without funding them. They still assume investment returns that markets have not delivered in 20 years. The hole grows deeper, while officials announce reforms that delay the collapse past their terms in office. The political incentive structure guarantees failure. Fixing pensions requires raising taxes today to pay for benefits tomorrow. That is electoral suicide. Ignoring pensions allows current services at current tax rates, while deferring costs to future taxpayers. That is re-election. And that math explains why every pension reform fails. Because the people who caused the crisis are the same people responsible for solving it, and solving it would require admitting they caused it. But here is what makes this permanent. The damage is not just financial, it is demographic. Stick around because what comes next explains why no amount of money can fix what has already been broken. The permanence of the pension crisis lies in numbers that cannot be legislated away. Demographics have shifted so dramatically that even perfect policy cannot restore solvency within any reasonable time frame. In 1980, public pension systems averaged 4.5 active workers, contributing for every retiree collecting benefits. That ratio allowed modest contribution rates to fund generous payouts. Workers had decades to contribute. Retirees collected for relatively short periods. The math worked. By 2024, the ratio had collapsed to 2.1 workers per retiree. Fewer contributors supporting more beneficiaries means higher required contributions from each worker or reduced benefits for each retiree. Neither adjustment is politically feasible at the scale required. Life expectancy compounds the imbalance. When pension formulas were designed, average retirement lasted 12 years. A worker retiring at 62 might collect benefits until 74. Current life expectancy extends retirement to 22 years or longer. Beneficiaries collect nearly twice as long as systems were designed to fund. The additional decade of payments per retiree represents trillions in unplanned obligations. Healthcare costs multiply the damage. Pension promises typically include retiree health insurance, a benefit that has inflated at rates exceeding 7% annually for decades. When contracts were signed in 1990, retiree healthcare cost $3,000 per year. By 2024, identical coverage exceeded $18,000 annually. Benefits that seemed affordable became catastrophically expensive, while inflation adjustments never appeared in contribution calculations. Investment returns cannot rescue systems facing these headwinds. To close the $4 trillion gap through investment performance, pension funds would need average returns exceeding 12% annually for the next 20 years. Markets have not delivered sustained 12% returns in any 20-year period in modern history. The gap will grow regardless of market performance, because demographics and healthcare costs compound faster than any realistic investment scenario. The workforce supporting pension contributions is itself shrinking. Manufacturing jobs that once provided stable public sector employment have disappeared. Union membership has declined from 30% of workers in 1980 to under 10% today. The political coalition that historically defended pension benefits has weakened, while the obligations those coalitions created remain permanently embedded in state constitutions. Younger workers increasingly reject public employment entirely. Salaries lag private sector equivalents by 15 to 30%. The pension benefits that once compensated for lower pay are now seen as unreliable promises rather than guaranteed security. Recruitment for teachers, police officers, and state administrators has become critical in dozens of states. Vacancies go unfilled. Services degrade. The cycle accelerates. Migration patterns reinforce the permanence. High-tax states losing residents to low-tax alternatives are precisely the states with the worst pension funding. Illinois loses population to Texas. New Jersey residents flee to Florida. Connecticut workers relocate to Tennessee. Each departure removes a potential taxpayer, while pension obligations remain geographically fixed. The states most dependent on population growth to fund promises are the states population growth has abandoned. The money is not coming back because the conditions that created pension solvency no longer exist. The ratio of workers to retirees cannot be restored. Life expectancy cannot be reduced. Healthcare costs cannot be reversed. Investment returns cannot exceed mathematical ceilings. What remains is managed decline, controlled reduction of promises, gradual impoverishment of retirees who trusted systems that failed them, and permanent economic damage to states that cannot escape obligations made before current residents were born. The crisis has already arrived for millions. The only question is how far it spreads. This is not just about government workers. The pension collapse threatens every American retirement, regardless of where you work or what you saved. The $4 trillion hole demands filling. That money will come from somewhere. Tax increases to fund pensions reduce disposable income for everyone, not just public employees. Service cuts to preserve pension payments degrade communities regardless of employer. Benefit reductions for public retirees push more Americans onto Social Security and Medicaid, increasing federal costs that affect every taxpayer. The interconnection runs deeper than government budgets. Private pensions learn the same bad habits as public systems. Corporate defined benefit plans carry underfunding exceeding $700 billion. When companies fail, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation provides backup coverage. But that federal insurer itself faces long-term deficits exceeding $100 billion. Corporate pension failures ultimately become taxpayer obligations through federal backstops. 401k plans emerged as the supposed solution to pension risk. Workers would manage their own retirements, investing contributions in markets that historically grew faster than pension obligations. But 401k balances tell a devastating story. The median retirement account for Americans aged 55 to 64 contains just $64,000. That sum generates approximately $250 monthly in sustainable retirement income. For context, average monthly expenses for retirees exceed $3,000. The pension crisis and the retirement savings crisis are the same crisis viewed from different angles. Neither public promises nor private savings have produced adequate retirement security for the majority of Americans. The generation currently approaching retirement faces the combined failure of every system designed to protect them. Housing equity once provided a backup. Sell the family home, downsize, and use the proceeds to supplement retirement income. But that strategy depends on home values appreciating faster than living costs. In pension crisis states, the opposite occurs. Property taxes rise to fund obligations. Services decline, making neighborhoods less desirable. Home values stagnate or fall. The equity retirees counted on evaporates alongside the pensions they expected. Social Security remains the last safety net. Yet Social Security's trust funds are projected to deplete by 2033. After depletion, the program can pay only 77% of scheduled benefits from ongoing payroll taxes. A 23% cut to Social Security benefits for 85 million Americans receiving payments. That reduction would push millions below the poverty line. The convergence is unprecedented. State pensions failing, corporate pensions underfunded, personal savings inadequate, Social Security approaching insolvency. Each individual failure might be manageable. Combined, they represent a retirement security catastrophe with no historical parallel. What happens when tens of millions of Americans reach retirement age with inadequate income? They work longer, blocking opportunities for younger workers. They rely on family support, burdening adult children managing their own financial stress. They consume less, slowing economic growth. They demand expanded government programs, increasing deficits. They experience poverty at rates not seen since the era before Social Security existed. The pension crisis is not about numbers on spreadsheets. It is about human lives constructed around promises that will not be kept. Teachers who chose lower salaries expecting pension security, firefighters who risked their lives with retirement guarantees as compensation, state workers who sacrificed private sector earnings, believing their futures were protected. Those promises are breaking. The people who made them are gone. The people who must pay for them had no voice in creating them. And the people who trusted them are running out of options. You do not need a pension to suffer from this crisis. You just need to live in America while it unfolds. What happens next depends on decisions being made right now in state houses and Congress by politicians who still believe they can defer the crisis past their careers. But the math has stopped cooperating with political timelines. States facing the worst funding gaps have three paths forward. None of them are good. Path 1 is benefit reduction. Courts in several states have ruled that pension benefits can be modified despite constitutional protections. Illinois reduced cost of living adjustments before courts reversed the cuts. Rhode Island froze pension accruals for current employees. Kentucky raised retirement ages and reduced formulas for future service. Each modification triggers lawsuits, labor unrest, and political backlash. But the modifications continue because there is no alternative. Path 2 is tax escalation. California, New York, and Connecticut have imposed progressive income tax increases. specifically tied to pension funding. Illinois added a constitutional amendment allowing graduated income taxes partly to address pension costs. New Jersey raised sales taxes, corporate taxes, and estate taxes, while still falling short of required contributions. Tax increases theoretically close gaps, but practically accelerate resident departures that widen them. Path 3 is federal intervention. Historically unprecedented, politically explosive, financially inevitable. The federal government has never bailed out state pension systems, but municipal bankruptcies now push pension failures onto federal courts. Multi-employer pension plans, covering private union workers, received $51 billion in federal support through the American Rescue Plan. The precedent is established. When pensions fail at scale, Washington intervenes. A federal bailout of state pensions would cost between $2 and $4 trillion, depending on design. That spending would add to federal debt, already exceeding $34 trillion. It would create moral hazard, rewarding states that underfunded promises while penalizing states that maintained fiscal discipline. It would transfer costs from state taxpayers who elected irresponsible politicians to federal taxpayers nationwide. And it would still not solve the structural problems that created the crisis. The most likely outcome is some combination of all three paths. Benefits reduced for future retirees, while current retirees maintain protections. Taxes increased modestly, while services degraded substantially. Federal assistance provided for the worst cases, while most states manage decline independently. What no path provides is restoration. The $4 trillion hole will not be filled. It will be managed. Promises will be partially kept. Retirements will be partially funded. Security will be partially delivered. And millions of Americans will discover that partial is not enough when rent is due and medicine is needed and the pension check arrives smaller than the contract guaranteed. The next 10 years will determine whether the pension crisis becomes a controlled demolition or an uncontrolled collapse. The decisions being made now will shape retirements for the next 50 years. And most Americans have no idea those decisions are being made. That is why this story matters. Not because pensions are complicated, but because retirement security is universal. Everyone grows old. Everyone stops working. Everyone needs income when labor is no longer possible. The pension crisis is not about public employees. It is about whether America keeps promises to its citizens. The answer, increasingly, is no. The politicians who created this crisis will never face consequences. The actuaries who warned about it were ignored. The workers who trusted the system are discovering the system was a lie. And the taxpayers who must now fund the shortfall never approved the promises being charged to their accounts. $4 trillion short. 50 states affected. 200 million Americans exposed. And almost nobody talking about it. Until now. Subscribe now, and if you are watching on TV, tap your remote so you never get blindsided again.